Lichtman, who was a very famous rabbi in various different places all across the place, a very, very great Zionistic rabbi, a chief rabbi in Lebanon, a rabbi we've spoken about, I believe, on various occasions before. He was born in the English year 1892. He passed away in 1964. I think his Hilula happened to be on the 12th of Adar, Yud Bet Adar, in Heitav Shin Chav Daled. Naturally, that was the Hebrew year. In the 25th of February, he passed away that year. He was a chief rabbi of the Jewish community in Beirut, in Lebanon. He'd go on to become the head of Jewish court also in his time. He was the author of a multi-volume book called the B'nai Sion, which would go out on various occasions of time, which was concentrating on the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, and also the book, the Orach Chaim, respectively. He was born in an area, I believe, Ukraine. I think it was called Berilov, if I'm not mistaken, in 1892. So I haven't really spoken about many rabbis born in Ukraine here on this series, so it's always good to spread our wings in that. He would pass away in Jerusalem at the end, I believe, Kamwat, the year 1964 it would have been. So we're talking about 61 years ago, approximately. It is over there. He was buried actually in Haram Nuchot at the end. We're going to know that he worked in various places, most notably in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, in Beirut, in Lebanon, and I think also maybe in various places in Ukraine also, which is very, very interesting enough. Let's explore a few of the highlights of the famous rabbi's life. So he was born, I think his father's name was Avram Levi, and he was born in the year 1892. He was born in Berilov, as I mentioned before, which is quite near, let's say, I think a place called Zhytomyr in Ukraine. A place we haven't really mentioned much in this series over here, because we mostly talk about the great Sephardi and Ottoman rabbis, respectively. So that was part of the Russian Empire, I think, at that point in time. And he was the seventh generation of a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Shechna Tzvi Minimirov, I think, happened to be a great rabbi. He was a Talmud, I think, Rabbi Menachem Nachum Michron Bil, the author of the Ma'or Enayim, if I'm not mistaken. So very famous rabbis, and he was a Magid Meshurim, I think, in the city of Nimirov, respectively. And at the time period of the Baal Shem Tov, famous Baal Shem Tov in himself, so there was a family connection through Torah study and Torah Academy places in itself, which we have to point out also. So very, very interesting. So Rabbi Lichtman will learn in Yeshiva in Lita, in Lithuania, I think Slobodka, and the Mi Yeshiva also, and various other places also. Now he would get his rabbinic ordination from the Rosh Yeshiva of Slochsk. I think his name was the famous Rabbi Issa Zalman Meltzer. Very interesting, one of the most famous European rabbis of his day, and he would be considered, let's say, among the Elohim over there, of that specific place. And I think especially he was close to or knew Rabbi Yoel Shorin, also respectively, who was a Rosh Yeshiva of Or Torah, I think of Nevoharet, of Berlinsky, if I'm not mistaken, or Zvil, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And then, very interesting enough, he would, I think, later on he would continue his learnings. I think he was a ram in the Zvil Yeshiva, if I'm not mistaken, the famous place, and he would work as rabbi of in an area of Poland, or Polin, you could say, respectively. I think it was Shimon Tversky's place in itself, or you can pronounce it in different places also. I think his brother sadly was murdered in a pogrom, I believe, at the end of the First World War. It was reported over, very, very sadly, and he considered it was anti-Semitism all throughout Jewish history in of itself. So I think he would actually go on. He had the son and would name his son after his brother, who was actually murdered. In his memory, he named the child after him. Now he would afterwards, I think it was around the time period of the war, or the middle of the year, Heitav Reish Pei, he would, right at the start of the 1920s, so in a second, he would make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, interesting enough, and he would get married to Rabbinit Esther Ahuva, I believe. She happened to be the daughter of Rabbi Moshe Nish Shila, if I'm not mistaken. That's sixth generation for Rabbi Menachem Mendel Merimino. Interesting enough, they would have, I think, twins, reported over Yosef and Moshe. Rabbi Lichtman would work in various important Torah positions over there for the congregation in Jerusalem, and he was a ram in Yeshivat Givat Shaul, I believe, and he would actually work, I think, also in Tel Aviv, and have a period of time working in Talmud Torah She'erit Israel. Now it's interesting, he would be really mashpia and there wasn't at that point in time many congregation rabbis in Israel, but he was one, and he was seen as like a very, very star, let's say, rabbi in itself, as a rabbi in that, and he had recommendations. I think he was close to Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Kohen Cook, who would go on to become chief rabbi, and also Rabbi Meltzer would also recommend him to do it. They'd write letters in support for him to go to Israel to become a rabbi over there, to have a prominent position. I think he would go on to become a head of Jewish court and a Moritzek and a leader of the community, respectively, in those places. Then come on 1932, he would end up going to Beirut in Lebanon. So we've spoken about some of the head rabbis in Lebanon. He would go on to become there. Once he got to Lebanon, in Beirut, he would work as a shochet, kosher slaughtering. He would be a bodek, investigator, and a dayan, a judge, and a morid tzedek of the Ashkenazi congregation in the city of Beirut. I wasn't aware that there was such a big Ashkenazi congregation in Beirut, but seemingly, apparently there was. There was definitely a rule over there. Now, I think Rabbi Shabtai Bochbot was chief rabbi of the Jewish congregation in Beirut. I think he would be appointed after him, if I'm not mistaken, and would really he was accepted not just by the Ashkenazi community to become chief rabbi, not just by the Sephardi community, but also the Ashkenazi community over there. I would see him as a spiritual leader of all the Jewish community in Lebanon, in Beirut at that point in time. And I think he had a son called Yaakov, being born there, and also Chava, and maybe another child. I'm not sure, maybe a few more children. I'll have to double check on that. So he was taking on prominent positions in Beirut. Hopefully we'll record a video on the history of Beirut Jewry at one stage in time. So in Beirut, he would also work as a rabbi of the synagogue over there, I think Ashkenazi community synagogue, and the Talmud Torah. Now, I think he was also connected to the Alliance school system, which was in Beirut, Kol Yisrael Chaverim over there. I think his son would also learn inside the Alliance system, if I'm not mistaken. He would work within regards to matters for Eretz Yisrael, and he'll be the head of the Mizrahi organization also in Beirut. So he was taking on various different positions. I think the head of Agudat Yisrael, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Levin, Rabbi Moshe Bloy, he was in contact with constantly also, and he would receive recommendations from Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon. These were famous rabbis at their stage in time, famous rabbis of Israel, and he would give over grandiose sermons inside his synagogue, and many years he would work there, respectively. So he was known as one of the famous rabbis of the city. Now, I think his situation was good financially, but he long returned to come back to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel. So after 27 years, I believe, he was in Beirut, in Lebanon. He would finally make his move back in 1959 with his family to Jerusalem over there, and be reunited with them basically after. And I think over there he would live in Givat Mordechai neighborhood, in the Poel Mizrahi neighborhood over there, if I'm not mistaken. Come on, in 1964, I think sadly he passed away through illness. He was buried in Har Menachot, the Mount of Rest burial place. And so that's very interesting. So it was around that point in time. Now, his book, The Bnei Tzion, was a very, very important work, very different, let's say, many chalakim. It was divided up in, I believe, 6 parts it was. The Bnei Tzion Chelek Aleph was, I think, from Simans Aleph to Mem Hey, and it was printed actually in Jerusalem, I think, in Hey Tavshin Aleph, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe in Beirut. I'll have to double check that. And the Bnei Tzion Chelek Bet was on the Chalakim Mem Vav to Kuf Nun Vav over there. This was finished, I think, in Sivan Hey Tavshin Yud Bet, came out in Beirut. Bnei Tzion Gimel was between the Simanim Kuf Nun Zayin to Reish Mem Aleph, and that would have been finished on Yud Chet Kislev in Hey Tav Reish Tzadik Chet, come out once again in Beirut, I think a period afterwards. The Bnei Tzion Chelek Dalet concentrate on Hilchot Shabbat. There was Simanim Reish Mem Bet to Shin, come out once again in Beirut, also we have to point out in Hey Tav Shin Yud Zayin. Then the Bnei Tzion Chelek Hey was in Hilchot Shabbat once again, Shin Aleph to Shin Mem Dalet. It was actually printed through the Mossad Rav Kook, a place we visited on this channel before in Jerusalem, in Hey Tav Shin Chav Sofit. And Bnei Tzion Chelek Vav was on once again in Hilchot Shabbat on Eruvin and Rosh Chodesh. There was Simanim Shim Mem Hey to Tav Chav Chet, respectively. There was Kuntras Biurim at the end. Mitzvot Lav Lahanot Nitnu I believe, respectively. So that is very, very interesting. Now, these 6 books would actually come about, and there was on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Orach Chaim section in of itself. And he was an educator, teaching various within regards to halakha maaseh, various different synagogue on different sugyot, different topics in of itself, with the different laws connected to it, and or the code of Jewish law. And we'll talk about his time periods, I think, especially Eretz Yisrael connection with regards to Rav Meltzer and Rav Kook was integral to it. Other Rabbanim, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who was, I believe, also chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Ben Zion Lichtman, who was, and also Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel. These were famous rabbis of his time, and very different psakim of the rabbim of Eretz Yisrael from Chutz Haaretz will actually be included over there, Pskei Halachot, and it was talking mostly about dealing mostly with the laws of Shabbat in of itself. So that we have to also point out also this important work, which was I think printed, I think during his lifetime mostly. I think it would also get a printing also through Edmund Safra, if I'm not mistaken, the famous philanthropist. I think he himself, I think, was born in Beirut also. So I have to point that out. And yes, that's very, very important. So a very important work, and I think these books, I think, was written, I think maybe when it was staying inside the neighborhood of Zichron Moshe neighborhood, if I'm not mistaken, and I think also Rav Ovadia Yosef, בתוספת מידות הערות שבתוכו בכללות מגירונות בכתב יד של הרב עובדיה יוסף. So there was connection with regards to Rav Ovadia Yosef's writings, I think in a contrast called Keter ציון, if I'm not mistaken, but very, very interesting. So he lived, once again, just to recap about the famous Rabbi Lichtman, he lived between 1892 October, maybe 1891, I have to double check, passed away in 1964, he was about 72 years of age. He was a great rabbi of his time, chief rabbi of Beirut, also we have to point out, and the Talmid of Rabbi Yoel Shorin and Rabbi Issa Zalman Meltzer, very great rabbis, and would be very well traveled all over different vicinities. Now, friends of our community here, we're learning about famous rabbis yesterday. If you descend from any of the great chachamim, please send me an email. I would love to hear more information. If anyone is interested in watching any of these videos, please share these videos also to other people. Growing the community at the moment. We don't just record videos here on famous rabbis of yesterday. We're recording on the famous synagogues, the famous yeshivot, different places. We tour around the country also. So doing a lot of important activities here on this channel. So please subscribe. I'm wishing blessings here from Israel. Take care. Shabbat and brach. Thanks.